Hello.
So good to be here with you. Congratulations on this wonderful, very special movie. It's hard to know where to begin. This movie is such a rich tangle of inspirations and influences. But why don't we just start with Paul? If you can trace it back to one kernel or genesis, if there was one, what was that?
It's very, very, very specific, which normally it isn't. So I like answering this and talking about it. That about 20 so years ago, I was taking a walk around my neighborhood. I think I just moved into this house that I bought. And I passed Portola Middle School, which is in Tarzana. And I saw, it must have been October because it was picture day and there was a blacktop full of kids, all in line. And I saw this one kid nagging at this girl who worked for the company, clearly trying to get a date or get her phone number or something like that. And it was a terrific premise. What would happen if he actually got the phone number? Or what would happen if, against all her better judgment, she turned up at the date? It was a kind of very classic screwball comedy idea. In many ways, I used to think about Gloria, that great John Cassavetes movie. It was a little Puerto Rican boy, and he's always screaming at Jenna Rollins, I am the man, you must listen to me. So I sort of imagined it much more extreme in the age difference. But so that's one thing, and I'd had that kicking around for many years, and I would think about it from time to time, like, that's a really good idea for a movie. That I should not forget that one. Mix that in with my relationship with Gary Getzman, who's some people might know him. He's Tom Hanks' producing partner. He worked with Jonathan Demme for many, many years. That's how I first met Gary. But Gary is from the same part of town that Alana and I are from. Gary started his life as a child actor. He was in Yours, Mine, Ours with Lucille Ball. And one of the first great stories that Gary told me, he says, did I ever tell you about the time I went to Ed Sullivan with Lucille Ball and my mom couldn't take me, so I needed a chaperone? I said, no. And he said, well, I got this woman, Kiki Page, who was a burlesque dancer who lived in Sherman Oaks, to be his chaperone. And I was like, that's really good. Like that's an older woman sort of bringing this prepubescent sort of teenager to New York. Like, that's pretty good. And then I met and started working with Alana about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe more now, feels like longer, because I've known her mom for 50 years. But knowing her and knowing her I work with her sisters. They have a band, and we make music videos. I had this magical alignment of 3 different elements. This kernel of a story, these wonderful stories that Gary told me, who would then say, did I ever tell you about the time I was arrested for murder? Like, no, you didn't, all of these episodes, this sort of episodic story that was right in front of my face. So knowing Alana and having this stuff, it just became this kind of like burst of energy that seemed impossible to not write or to stop writing once I started. I just enjoyed these people so much, and so mixed in with really just taking a lot of things from my life, from my time, my childhood. Yeah.
And Alana, we see just you have this just incredible Star is Born quality on the screen, this magnetism that just comes through. It's so obvious. But when Paul first asked you to be in the movie and to be in the movie to such an extent, what did you think? What was your reaction?
I immediately said yes, obviously. And then I didn't know what I got myself into. I had no idea what I was doing. I had never acted in anything before. Not even close. Even in the music videos, I feel like I was just a side character most of the time. But Paul reassured me. I always go back to the fact that me and Paul trust each other so deeply. And he only had to say, I got you, don't worry about it. And I was hooked, I was in. And that's where it all began.
And you and your sisters, of course, were used to performing together, but they're in this too, and your parents are in this too. How did the family, there's so many family elements to the movie, how did that part of it come together?
You know, that I mean that's well listen, that's easy because I'm trying to think. You can't have one without all three, really.
It's true.
But it also created a really nice story situation to help understand Alana. You know, she's the baby of the family, and it was amazing to shoot the scenes because we had been shooting for probably 30, 35, 40 days, and when we shot the scenes at her house, we were probably about halfway through, and Alana had gained an enormous amount of confidence. She was doing so well, but the second we were shooting those scenes, she just sort of like changed into the baby of the family. It was like, oh, okay, that's how it is. So you can't, you might sort of blossom or get out of the typecasting that your family might put you in, but when your family's around, there is a role that you play. You are the youngest, you stay quiet, and this is the middle child, and this is this, and so on. So I thought it was I'd like to, as a selfish writer, was like, to have all of them in the same room is going to be very dynamic and exciting to watch, and they obviously play music so well together that there's no way they won't be able to just sort of make the music of what it means to do a movie scene. Her dad is a different story because he has never acted before. So we would do scenes like the first time, because mostly they were improvised, those scenes. And he would kind of think that he had to kind of like come off as like an American sitcom father or something, who was like, listen, don't come home so late at night next time, otherwise you'll be in trouble, like lesson learned and everybody's happy. And I said, I definitely don't think this is quite right, because this is not how you act in real life. I've seen it, And so I just encouraged him to scream at Alana in the way that he would normally scream at her if she was late. And then he loosened up, and he's just magnetic to watch in the film.
He's amazing in it, and I do have to ask about the wonderful Shabbat family dinner scene. I mean, is that true story? Real?
That is a true story. That's a Haim story. That's not even a Paul story or a Gary story. That is a true Haim story. Not my boyfriend, my middle sister's boyfriend, who she's not with anymore. I think we can all agree that that's probably the right vibe. But yeah, my sister, her boyfriend came to a Passover dinner, not a Shabbat dinner, and refused to read the Haggadah, and it was 55 million times more awkward than what you saw on the screen. But a pretty accurate depiction of my father's initial reaction to, my sister's boyfriend saying he's an atheist. But I remember telling Paul that, and then reading the script and being like, well, it's here. It's always going to be, frozen in time, but it is like a Haim family fable or a tale that we tell every year at Passover.
Now it belongs to all of us to do.
Yes. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Cooper Hoffman is just terrific in this movie as Gary Valentine, and he is of course the son of the late and very great Philip Seymour Hoffman, with whom Paul worked with so brilliantly. Just when did he come in? When was it obvious that he was going to play Gary from the start, or?
Well, he came into the process probably about halfway through writing. When anytime you write a child or anything that isn't sort of a proper adult actor, you kind of get nervous at a certain point, because it's a tall order. You have to find somebody to fill this. At its best, you're looking for somebody who doesn't have training, who just has a natural ability. I've worked with this beautiful kid named Dylan Frazier, who was at HW in There Will Be Blood, and he's just a boy from Texas that we found. So you start to size up that this is a sizable part that we need to find somebody for. And I thought about Cooper about halfway through writing, but I quickly sort of put that away, that thought. And I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it was because that I thought I needed to follow a more traditional route towards reading young actors, which I did. I read them with Alana, and nothing was quite right. And I can remember sitting in my living room with all the sisters were there actually, and I said, "What about Cooper?" And you know if something's going well with the three Haim sisters when they all kind of like just sort of turn and they stop talking, because they're always all talking at the same time. And I thought, oh, this seems like a good idea. They seem to, if not just one of them thinks it's a good idea, but three of them think it's a good idea, you follow through on it. So I called Cooper and I pretended that I was coming to New York I was actually going to New York to read some other actors, but I pretended that it would be helpful to me if he would just read the script out loud with Alana. Now, I don't know why I created this elaborate cover story, because he saw right through it immediately. He's like, would never ask me to do this. Something is weird. But we read it with Alana and Cooper, and it was so bad, but it was magical, because it was bad in all the best ways. It was bad because he had never read the script before. She'd only read it a few times, and as a director, in a way, you don't want it to be perfect. You want this joy of just seeing how they interact, and to know that that's the only thing that matters, that the fucking words don't matter. We'll get the words. That's going to be the easy part. But there was this incredible connection between the two of them, and it made her feel younger, and it made him feel older, and something just really wonderful happened. Yeah, it was like that, and then we did it again the next day, and it got better, and then we did it the next day, and on, just like that.
Yeah, that very real, spontaneous quality you capture that is so, that untrained quality, I think which you're alluding to. It's and it's so funny because during that scene where he's auditioning, it's like he has to also play a bad actor, and he's very convincing as it.
Yeah.
Alana, you and Cooper have this, I love your chemistry in this movie. You have this fascinating push-pull dynamic. It's like you're these particles that keep attracting and repelling each other throughout, and this bond that you have feels so real, and it's especially special because he this was his first time acting as well. I mean, did that really bond you two?
Totally. Yeah. Yes. And when we talk about this New York trip, Paul, I had read the script out loud with a bunch of kids, and it didn't feel right, which obviously terrified me because I knew there couldn't be an Alana without a Gary. And when we went to New York, this fateful night that we read the script, and I didn't know it was terrible, but good to know. Funny, that's great. I'm learning a lot in this Q&A. But when I read with Cooper, it felt immediately, I knew you were my Gary. I don't know if it was the universe. I don't know if it was just energy. I knew that if I had him with me and I was by his side, we could take on the world together, and that is Gary and Alana. That's the definition of them, is they take on the world together, and they're better when they're together and they're fighting on the same team. And that was me and Coop the whole time we were shooting. Again, we had never done this before, so every day we had called each other and we're like, what are we doing? We're terrible. What are we doing? How are we gonna do this? But we were a great team, and you can tell, and we became best friends, and I consider him my best friend, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without him. There's no way.
You mentioned being directed by Paul in music videos and feeling like kind of the side character, and so what is it like going from that to being thrust into the spotlight? What is Paul like as a director? Just, you mentioned very supportive and having your back, but what did that look like and feel like? Yeah.
He's the best. What are you talking about? I think the thing that I love the most about Paul is that he really did let me and Cooper run free. It wasn't, talking about the script, there were times where he would, there's many funny times that I was supposed to do something and I just physically couldn't do it because it just wasn't me. And there were times where Paul was just like, that's not Alana Kane. You can't do it if you're not Alana Kane. But he really did let me run free and improv a lot. And a lot of the things that I improv'd are in the movie, which is insane to me. And it was just a lot of trying things and go over there and do this and go. It was just every day was a new adventure. And Paul trusted two people that have never done this before, which is you're crazy. You're crazy, but you're a genius. And it was, every day was, I mean, it was.
But I think for anybody that's seen the music videos that we've done together, you have to it's a little bit of a reverse scenario, is that we were making these music videos where we had no time and no money, and they were absolutely the best experiences that I've had doing anything ever. It was just so loose and so fun and quick and improvisational, and we would think of an idea on a Monday, and we would get a bunch of people together by Thursday, and we would shoot them over 2 days, because that's what we had. And so it was, in writing the movie and imagining it, it was trying to take some of that looseness and immediacy and put it into 65 days. So it was like the work that we had done informed how we were going in to make the film. It wasn't, and so there was a shorthand. There's no, Ron Howard told me one of the best stories, and I think I told this to Alana. He was directing Parenthood. It was a huge cast of characters, and the most intimidated he was by the great Jason Robards. And Jason Robards came on for a day, and he had a very intimate scene with Tom Hulce. And Jason Robards played it beautifully and intimately and very emotionally, which was entirely wrong for what he needed. And Ron Howard thought long and hard about, how am I going to go to Jason Robards and tell him that he's misplayed this scene? And he walked to Jason Robards and he said, Mr. Robards, I really feel like, because you haven't seen your son in a long time, and he started to go on this very long, convoluted sort of explanation of what he wanted, and Jason Robards said, you mean too much with the boohoo? I said, yeah, it's too much with the boohoo. And then they did it again, and he did it perfectly. And it was like, I think we had a shorthand that was like, sometimes, too much with the boohoo. Like, we have to know that we're doing this wrong. And there's like, sometimes the business of making movies is not this sort of elaborate, endless dialogue and serious talking. Like, you have a day to make, and you've got stuff to do, and you want to try something, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then you find things that do work, and you move on. And that, I think we'd gotten used to that way of working. So, then the shorthand was too much with the boo-hoo,
I needed that a lot.
That's a good lead into my next question. I mean, nearly every review I've read of this movie, including the one I wrote, uses the words laid back, perhaps a little deceptively, because I understand that characterization, but it's not the master. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like the Paul Thomas Anderson laid back is a little different from the general laid back. There's so much going on in every moment of the movie, and there's so much history. There's so much culture. There's so much. Was this a laid back experience? Maybe compared to the other ones, but was it still hard?
Well, no, that's a great question, because I've been reading even great reviews that say it's laid back and it meanders, and I'm like, well, hang on a second. It takes a lot of work to make something meander that well. But I think that I'm kind of joking, but in a weird way, it does take a lot to make it sort of feel laid back. And I thought that was the irony of this whole process, was like, oh, okay, to make it feel, I would always marvel at films by my favorites are the ones that make it like Billy Wilder looks like he did nothing. And he didn't do nothing, he did a lot. He wrote it incredibly well, he directed it with incredible precision, and they fooled you into thinking like, I could do that. That's so easy. And it's like, it's not easy. Our script on this was actually, ironically, very, very tight. And so it required a very tight script to allow it to somehow feel that, because you did want it to feel loose. You want it to feel like a ball that's just bouncing forward. And maybe that's because it was based on sort of this episodic way that Gary would tell me stories. There was a sort of built-in thing that happened there. But the environment that we had felt incredible because, I just made Phantom Thread with Daniel Day-Lewis, and so if you spend 6 months in the House of Woodcock, I'm for anybody that's seen that movie, it's not laid back at fucking all. It's like, it's pretty tightly coiled spring situation. This was completely different. This was, the majority of people were it was their first film, not just Cooper and Alana. And then we would have wonderful moments or episodes where somebody like Sean Penn, Tom Waits would come on, Bradley Cooper, Harriet Harris, who plays Mary Grady, the talent agent. You know, those were miracles that were given to us that would sort of charge us up and send us off into new episodes. So I don't know, it's an odd combination, but we had a very tight schedule, and you know, it's wonderful working with kids actually, because you can only shoot 10 hours a day. So it's really all business, you know. It's the business of getting the shots that you need and getting to work, which is really wonderful. There's no meandering.
It doesn't really meander. It kind of zigzags, but it
Zigzag. I like that. Zigzags is better.
And how could I have not been asked about Bradley Cooper and Sean Penn yet, especially Bradley Cooper, who is just so screamingly funny as John Peters. And I understand you spoke with John Peters in preparation for the movie, and of course Gary Gutzman really did deliver a waterbed to him.
Yes.
But that episode also played out very differently, I understand.
That's completely different. That's the exact opposite. Is that Gary? I don't think Gary was there, but Gary's buddies, Kirk, Hank, Mark, they delivered a waterbed to John Peters. They told me the story. Nothing happened. They said John Peters was the nicest guy in the whole world. They put the waterbed together. He went on a date with Barbra Streisand. That's not what I needed. We needed something far more dramatic. So I created the whole scenario, not knowing exactly what John Peters was like, but just sort of basing it on, creating the kind of fabled, insane Hollywood movie producer, like 1970s style version. Bradley, I think one of the reasons that Alana and Cooper had such an incredible bond was that the very first thing that we shot was the stuff with Bradley. They were bound together by surviving that hurricane of a performance. Cooper was up first, and he got to get sort of, dominated by him and saying, "I'm going to kill your family, I'm going to kill Streisand," all this kind of stuff. And then the next day, Alana had to drive this truck, with cameras and lights attached to it through the windy hills of Tarzana, with Bradley starting to improvise and coming on to her and coming up as, but that was like this amazing trial by fire that I think set a terrific tone for the movie. Was that I would see them to sort of go off, and they were like just trying to survive. John Peters and Bradley Cooper, who I said, Bradley, you cannot buddy up to these guys. You have to really show them what make-believe is like. You cannot pretend for 2 seconds that you're Bradley Cooper, you're John Peters, and you're here to get your fucking gas in your car, and he was like, let's go. So it was a great way to start, and it was a terrific place setter for them, really brought them together to survive that. It was a fun sequence to shoot. It was only 5 or 6 days.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. And Alana, you behind the wheel of that U-Haul is one of maybe the great scene of vehicular chaos in a movie this year. What was that like? I mean, had you done this before? Was there?
Yeah, no, I can safely say that I've never driven a 70s U-Haul through the hills of Tarzana. No, that was really me driving. It was day 2, as Paul said. There was a camera and one of the biggest movie stars in the world and my best friend and lights, and it was crazy. I mean, there's no other adjective to say. It was crazy, but it was so fun. I mean, my reactions to Bradley Cooper hitting on me are all just my life, because I was so nervous I couldn't think of a backstory that quickly. So he asks me, "What's your sign?" And I go, "Sagittarius," because I'm a Sagittarius. "When's your birthday?" "December 15th. I was like, "That's my actual birthday." He's like, "What do your parents do?" "Real estate." "My parents do real estate." "How many sisters do you have?" 2. "Are they older?" "They're older." It was just every question that he asked, I was like, and I was 3 seconds behind. I was like, I don't know how this is even happening. This is day 2. Paul's in a follow van. I'm like looking over and being like, But it was great. I mean, what a great way. We fully jumped into the deep end with our eyes open, both me and Cooper, day 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 shooting, and it did really bring us together. I mean, it was a perfect way to start, because it was just a tornado and we were trying to get out of it with everything intact.
The rest was relative downhill.
I mean, the chaos never ended. I also still was on the back of a motorcycle with Sean Penn. Like, never ended. It was never ending chaos. And also Tom Waits. I mean, every day I was just like, how is this happening? What is going on?
Yeah, and the Sean Penn and Tom Waits, Paul, about that scene. I mean, it's, you know, you have Bradley Cooper playing a real person, John Peters, and then, you know, Jack Holden, who is of course William Holden, kind of a coded, you know, kind of, yeah. It's such a mix of fact and fiction, and Sean Penn just pops up as such a delightful surprise when he appears, and you get the sense he's giving just a real, really tender kind of performance with not a lot of mockery or satire even. It's just that. Yeah. How did casting Sean Penn? I mean, had you wanted to work with him?
I like every director, I've wanted to work with Sean Penn forever, and I've tried to get him in films, and I've had a friendship with him for a while, and this seemed like, if he was going to say no to this, I was not cooking dinner ever again for the two of us. It was like, please come and do this. But he said yes. I kept thinking of him as I was writing it, because one of my favorite actors is William Holden. One of my favorite actors is Sean Penn, so sort of my placement to that was I need this person with this gravity. I also love seeing Sean handsome. I love seeing him with a haircut. You know, he's got that beautiful movie star quality. You never see him like that. He's always like saving people and, you know, doing things. And so I asked him to do it. He decided to do it. He suggested Tom Waits, which I thought was fucking brilliant. And I gave him a William Holden biography. I said, you don't have to do an impression or anything like that, but this is who this is based on. William Holden made a great movie called Breezy. I don't know if it's great, but he made a movie called Breezy, Clint Eastwood's second movie. And it was Kay Lenz and William Holden. It's one of those May-December romance movies that they do not make anymore. And I kind of patterned the whole thing off that. And I think it's nice in the film when Sean arrives, because, you know, Gary and Alana have really reached this sort of peak in their relationship. You're not quite sure where this thing can go. And it's the volume of it has reached a certain point, and you hear this voice off camera, and it's a movie star, you know. And I think it helps an audience see a movie star play a movie star. It flows with the story quite well. It just makes sense. It doesn't take you out of it. It helps you flow into the stream, I hope. So I could go on and on about this, but we shot that whole sequence for about 5 or 6 days. And working with Sean Penn was everything I'd hoped it would be. I know it was everything Alana had hoped it would be. Because you have to understand that we have these episodes, so much of this movie takes place between Alana and Gary, but then we have these sequences where they are torn apart. So Gary, poor young Cooper, had to spend 6 days looking at Alana, snuggle up with Sean Penn and Tom Waits, and drink martinis and have this wonderful time at the tail of the cock. And, you know, he had to take it. You know, he just had to take it. And I look back at it as really one of the best 5 or 6 days I've ever had doing this work. It was magical, actually.
So many of those important scenes take place in Tail of the Cock, and that the ambiance that you achieve there is just, it's so rich. And just I know we couldn't possibly do more than scratch the surface of all the locations in this movie, but just recreating the valley of your 70s childhood, just what was that like? And quick for Alana, you know, what was it like acting against this backdrop of an older, time capsule-y version of the valley that you grew up in? Yeah.
It was great. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
No, go ahead.
I mean, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. I am a Valley girl through and through. Oh, do we have some Valley girls, some Valley kids in the audience? It was one of the things that brought me and Paul together, was our love for the Valley, because I feel like growing up in the Valley, for some reason, you get hate for, you know, people, you know, don't like the Valley. I've always loved it. But it bonds Valley kids. I mean, when you see a Valley kid at a party, you're like, okay, grade 1A, I see you. But it was, I mean, just even going back to the 70s, I've always loved the 70s because that was when my mother was in her 20s, and she would tell me all these stories about going out and dancing, and her whole life revolved around where she was going to dance and where she was going to go, and the fights she would get in with my dad later in the 70s where he couldn't reach her because there were no cell phones and there was no technology that kept them together. And you had to be accountable. You had to say, I'm gonna be at this place at this time, and you have to show up there, or the person, if you don't show up, something probably bad happened. And just kind of transporting into this time that was just so, it felt so great to be a part of it. I mean, I feel like everybody on set was kind of like, why isn't this just how it is? Like,
it was very fun to watch Alana and Cooper try to figure out how to do a rotary phone. And like
telling the story.
Sticking their fingers in it, like it was like this magical box. Like, it was kind of endlessly exciting to all the crew members and I, who was like over 50 years old, you know. But I think, you know, I don't know. I do romanticize that time in my life because you're young. You romanticize the time in your life when you were younger, when there was a certain type of innocence that was there. You know, the mistake is to think that it was better. You know, obviously the scene that we have at the end of the film with Joel Wax things have gotten a lot better. That's so, you know, nostalgia is a tricky trip. But I'm sorry, I just flashed on something because we were talking about the Jack Holden. When I was growing up in the Valley, there was a very famous story that were two different versions of it. There was a restaurant called the Ram's Horn in Encino at Pettit and Ventura. It was famous because Jerry Dunphy went there, Channel 9 News, like of the Ron Burgundy of Los Angeles. And Sonny and Cher went there because they had a house up in the Encino Hills. And very famously one night, Evel Knievel came in and got hammered and jumped like 10 cars in the middle of Ventura Boulevard. But then somebody was like, I was there. He did not make it out of the parking lot. He wiped out. You know, and it was this kind of like classic Valley folklore that we, you know, sort of stole and sort of inserted in the Tail of the Cock, which was a great, I don't know if anybody went to the Tail of the Cock. It was at Coldwater in Ventura, beautiful restaurant. There you go. That was the place you went for, you know, birthdays, you know, special occasions, your grandma's Mother's Day, that kind of stuff. And they had this incredible stride piano player named Johnny Guarneri who would play. But it was a magical place. It was, you know, dark wood and dark booths and incredible service. And that was the set that when my kids came to visit, to be a part of it, that was the one they loved the most. They loved the Pinball Palace too, but they loved this beautiful, intimate restaurant that seemed so fancy. It was so fancy. Yeah, if we could have kept one set, I would have kept that one, because that really flashed me back to a different time in a good way.
So one more question. Speaking of just those places, you know, Licorice Pizza, of course. Mm-hmm. Tell us what the title means, because I know this was a hard movie to title, and it's a very evocative title, but that is pointedly not mentioned or seen in the movie. But yeah.
Well, it's two words that go together. On one level, it's two words that go together that instantly take me back to my childhood. Probably because I ate a lot of licorice and I ate a lot of pizza. But there's also a real thing. Licorice Pizza was the chain of record stores in the San Fernando Valley. It was all of Southern California, but there was 3 or 4 of them in the Valley. Licorice Pizza being another way to describe an LP. It's shaped like a pizza, black licorice, right? I think it's from an Abbott and Costello gag. But yeah, it was very difficult to name this film. Alana and Gary seemed too simplistic, overly simplistic, and something. So I decided to just sort of go with something that took me back. That anytime I hear it, I kind of salivate and think about my time running around these streets and the way that I think romantically about it. Yeah, I think we did all right. I think it rolls off the tone. It's a curious title, but fuck it.
You did all right. You took us back to congratulations. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming on.